cool. So we're back in the Jody Jazz Lounge area over here, and what I wanted Jody to talk about were the parts of the mouthpiece. You know, a lot of us just stick a reed on and just play, but I think it's really important to know the parts of the mouthpiece, especially if you're going to upgrade your mouthpiece, if you're looking to another type of mouthpiece. You know, what are the parts, what to look for?
Sure. You know, on one hand, you don't need to know anything. You just need to play a bunch of mouthpieces, and what plays good that's what you'll play. But a lot of people don't get a chance to play a bunch of mouthpieces. Most stores don't have a lot to choose from.
Yeah.
And so there are some very important parts. I think it does help to know a little bit. The part that makes or breaks a mouthpiece, for me, the most important part is the facing curve. And what that means is on a mouthpiece, it has a table, and that's flat, and that's where the reed sits. And here is the table down here, and the reed is sitting, and at a certain point, the mouthpiece curves away from the reed. And that's the facing curve. At the end, where the tip of the reed is and the tip of the mouthpiece, that's called the tip opening. How far that curves away, that's a bigger tip opening. Or if it doesn't curve away as far, it's a small tip opening. The reason the facing curve is so important is because it allows the reed to vibrate, and if it's a good natural curve, the reed can vibrate its best. It's so critical that these rails, as they curve, these are the side rails, that they go exactly equally curving, and that the tip rail is an extension or the end of that curve, and it's perfectly formed. When that is happening, if you can do the suction test on a mouthpiece where you put your palm of the hand on the end of the shank, and the shank is over here, you put your palm, you close that off, and you suck all the air out of the mouthpiece with the reed on it, it'll like close up, and then it'll pop back. And that means your mouthpiece, your reed is sealing on the mouthpiece. If the mouthpiece is malformed, maybe these rails aren't even, or the tip rail is messed up, it won't seal. And when you play, sometimes you can get a sound, it plays okay, and then sometimes you'll be playing and it seems like your low notes aren't coming out.
Yeah.
Or it's like the horn is leaking. And that's when a mouthpiece is really malfunctioning. And no matter what you do, it's going to be very hard to play. And I mentioned to you earlier today that sometimes the stock mouthpiece in a case is malformed, and poor person who starts that, could be a kid or an adult, they can't play their low notes and they think it's them.
Yeah.
So and the reason I know that the facing curve is the most important, because after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prototypes, like when I'm working on a new mouthpiece, and it's not playing, I finally change the curve, and I get a good curve, and all of a sudden it's working. It's like, oh, now we're talking.
Yeah.
Now the curve doesn't mean it's just only one curve. That's the magic and science of mouthpiece making, is the different infinite variety of curves. And what that means is that it could start off slow, like it's more flat at first, and then it curves more. Or it could curve real fast. It could do the curve in a shorter period of time, or a shorter space. What that means is if I wanted a short curve, the curve, instead of starting way back here or something, it could start here. It would be flat, 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 and then we'd have to get this tip opening in a short amount of time.
How would that, okay, now this is interesting. So how would that affect the sound?
Yeah. A long curve brings in more bottom to the sound. It feels big and open in the bottom. It could be a little more difficult to play your altissimo. A short curve, it's easier to play the altissimo, but it's tighter feel, and your bottom is not as big. Now, that's how it affects the sound. And in that same respect, altissimo, think about that short curve, not as much reed is vibrating. When you have a harder reed, your altissimo is easier to play.
Now, hold on. That's interesting, though, because other people have said that it's easier to play altissimo where you're playing on a weaker reed, a less.
They are wrong.
Okay, interesting. Okay,
Yeah, they are wrong. So a softer reed is going to allow those low notes to come out nice and easy. But the bad part of that is that as you play up higher, if that reed is too soft, your high notes sound weak and flat and whiny.
yeah,
And then it is harder to get your altissimo. Now, there are people like Gerald Albright who can play a very soft reed, like a 2 Leger, and he can get all the altissimo he wants all day. And he's special that way.
right.
Not everybody can do that. If you're really having altissimo problems, you might need to go a little harder reed. But if you're having low note problems, you might need to go a little softer. But this length of the curve is more important in a way. Some people think you pick a mouthpiece tip opening because it's how much you practice and what you can handle. If you only practice less than 4 hours a week, you can't handle an 8-star
Right.
because you get too tired.
Yeah,
But let's say you practice 8 hours a week. You can handle almost any tip opening, but you're going to like one over the other, not necessarily because of the tip opening, but because of where that curve starts and how much mouthpiece you take in,
right.
where your teeth are kind of coming up against the reed. We know our lip is in the way, but those teeth are trying to hit that reed at some point, some place. So I'll hear somebody, I used to do this in New York. I'd be in my office in the loft, and I'd be in there. Somebody'd be in the soundproof booth practicing mouthpieces. I mean, picking tip openings. And all of a sudden I'd hear it just vibrate, play right. And I come in and say, what's that one? And they say, oh, that's the number 7 or that's number 5 or whatever. And I'd say, that's the one. All of a sudden, everything works.
It's efficient.
And at that time, I didn't really put it together with it's because of the length of the curve. But I think that's what it is. Now, when we make in traditional curve making, a 5 tip opening, let's say, that's the smaller tip opening, has a curve that's shorter. I'm going to use the same curve schedule for the 5, 6, and 7, meaning it's the same type of curve. So when I want to make the bigger tip opening, I start the curve further away from the tip. And so the bigger the mouthpiece, the longer that curve.
Okay.
And so you might like a 7 or 8 because you take more mouthpiece than the person who plays the 5.
Right. And actually, I'm just thinking to myself, too, like Derek Brown, right? He has his own signature model of
Yes.
mouthpiece now. He's playing a 5.
And that's probably for his special reason because
Yeah.
he used to play an 8, then he went to a 7-star, he went to a 7, he went to a 6 because he started playing longer and longer concerts, and he's doing that slap tonguing. He's while he's playing, he's pushing that reed closed, and when he has to push it with an 8-star, he's altering the pitch more than when he has to play it with a 5. He's pushing up so far on that reed, and so physically demanding what he does over an hour of nothing but solo playing, it's physically demanding, and it was an intonation thing too.
Oh, okay.
So that's his special case where we got him down to a 5 dV. You can almost look at it and it starts playing. Just blow, whisper at it. It's still a great mouthpiece. I had to work to make that work in a 5. It's not just a 5. So
going off of that for a second, so you mentioned also, how much mouthpiece you take in.
yeah.
So if you're the type of person that takes in a lot of mouthpiece, a 5 tip opening is not going to be helpful to you.
It might not work, yeah, because you need more reed to vibrate. So that's somebody could look at it where they get a mouthpiece they kind of like the sound, and they could adjust how much mouthpiece they take in also. And that's always something to look at in working on your sound. How much mouthpiece are you taking in? So it's the same type of balance when you're working with the reed strength and the tip opening. The smaller the tip opening, the harder the reed can be. The bigger the tip opening, it's probable that you go to a softer reed. It's because that big tip opening, that reed has to travel further. You need more energy to make it do its journey.
Yeah. Then so going off of what you said before, too, which this is really important. There's going to be anomalies, right? We talked about Gerald Albright and all that kind of thing. And there are some people that can play screaming high altissimo. They may play a 9, tip opening, and they may be playing on a 4 reed. They may be playing on a, 3.5 or whatever. Or they could be, playing on a 2.5. I think, there is going to be some variability, but most people generally are like around 7 star, 8 for the most part in terms of like tip opening size. But, when you're saying like a softer reed or a harder reed, I kind of agree with you when it comes to altissimo too. Like too soft of a reed, at least I know for my own self, it's that reed's just not strong enough. I need something, that's going to have some body to it or whatever. But in terms of like most people, in terms of tip strength, and let's talk Van Doren Blue Box is just the standard, because I know Legers pretty much follow that or whatever, but most people are probably like around a 2.5 to a 3.
Yeah. But maybe let's not talk Blue Box as a standard, because the Blue Box is a half strength harder than all the jazz reeds.
Okay. Especially Rigatti and stuff, yeah.
But I was getting back to that 9 star and 3, 4, 2.5 reed. So somebody who plays a 7 star and plays a 2.5 reed, if they played a 9 star, they might have to go to a softer reed. So even though it sounds like a soft reed, it could still do the altissimo. Now, a lot of people have played a 7 star, let's say a tenor, 2.5 reed. They might have been on one of the very popular traditional old school mouthpieces. When they came to a mouthpiece like the DV, which is so free blowing, it's so efficient, that 2.5, all of a sudden they say, I don't like the mouthpiece. Well, try this reed, because they need a 3.5 on the mouthpiece. That 2.5, that the mouthpiece they had a lot of resistance.
You have to find a resistance in the reed.
So there's at a time I was selling DVs and I wasn't putting a reed. They would be returning them, and I'd say, what reed were you using? And 2.5, like Rico Royal or something. So I started putting a 3 medium D'Addario Select Jazz in there, and somebody would still call me and say, I'm going to return the mouthpiece. I said, did you try the reed? No. I said, try the reed and call me back. And they'd call back and they said, oh, you were right.
Okay,
harder reed solved that problem. So the reed can be a make or break situation. So getting to other parts of the mouthpiece that are...
Yeah, so, so a lot of people would buy, they have this idea that they're buying for the tip opening. I know one of my mentors actually said, you got to get the largest tip opening and the hardest reed. That's what I was told. And that's not necessarily the best advice.
There is no advice for all people.
Yeah.
There's no one thing has it. It can be done with that big. George Garzone has been one of our greatest endorsers for the longest time, and he plays 10 star, HR star for most of his career. I made him an 11 recently, and it's a great mouthpiece, and he's playing that. And he's getting older, but he's still as strong as a bull, and he plays a hard reed, and he gets a beautiful sound. Not many people can do that, but there's certain thing about the sound when that you have that bigger mouthpiece. But it's a fallacy to think you get a bigger mouthpiece, you have a bigger sound. I really feel you need to have the mouthpiece that's most comfortable, and your sound is going to come out the best. When I make a mouthpiece, each tip opening is its own program. In other words, I adjust the floor, the baffle, to have the same timbre, the same brightness from 5 to 7 to 9. But traditional mouthpieces that were molded, there was only one mold. And all the tip openings had to be made from that mold. Therefore, as it got bigger and bigger, it got darker and darker. And so a 5 from a traditional molded mouthpiece is usually quite a bit brighter than the big tip openings.
Oh.
So in my mouthpiece, I make that much less difference. So when you have that much reed vibrating with a big mouthpiece, you have a little more harmonics in the sound, but you don't have more volume really. You can get as much as you need from a smaller mouthpiece. Just go with what's comfortable. Same thing with the reed. Go with what's comfortable, what feels good and what sounds good. Everything is sound and feel, and you got to have both.
It's also, would you also agree too, before we get to some of the other parts here for a second, would you also agree when you're trying out a mouthpiece, some people want more resistance, some people want more free blowing. For me, like I talk about, what's efficient? How are you efficiently getting the sound? So, when you're, giving advice to people about trying out mouthpieces and stuff, it has to be the feel, has to feel right. The intonation has to be as spot on as it possibly can. Of course, there's going to be some notes that you always have to voice differently. But, I think it's also about the blow of it too. If you're a person that wants something that's very free blowing, as opposed to someone that maybe wants a little bit more resistance.
Yeah, that's part of that resistance. And you can get that resistance with a reed. Right. Or there's a thing, it's not just resistance. It's like, it's a feeling when you blow in, where does that air go? Making so many mouthpieces, I've made mouthpieces that have a hiss, like some early prototypes. It's because the direction of the air coming into the baffle, and there's a hiss in there, especially when you play real soft. You start to tone from zero, and you can hear that hiss. So you got to change that. There's a certain feedback when I blow in that it comes back to me, a feeling. I like that, but I like a feeling that I blow in and it's very accepting of my air. There's certain brands of mouthpieces that kind of hug you. You blow in and you feel guided in there, and that's a certain feel that some people like. I like the more open feeling in a jazz mouthpiece. In a classical mouthpiece, sometimes I do like that hugging feeling. So these are hard things to describe, but playing so many mouthpieces, and maybe I played more mouthpieces than anybody in the world. I think it's possible, because we play test all this stuff, and I played. So it's so weird to me. I told you I've been playing golf, and when I hit a good golf ball, there's a solid feeling to it that equates right back to when I'm making a mouthpiece and the air goes to the right spot and it feeds back to me. It's like the same feeling. It's that strange to me. But so don't think you need a certain typical. If you have a preconception of what you need, please just throw it out the window and try everything. I see people buy the wrong things sometimes because they came with a preconception and they won't accept when they sound better on something. I can tell. I've been doing this a long time. Yeah. That's the one you should get. Oh, no, I need the big one.
Yeah, lots of myths. And here's another myth, too, that, if you're going to play jazz or rock, you need a high baffle.
Well, if you want to cut to a certain degree, you can. There are some players who play popular music, loud music, with their own dark sound, but it can result in a kind of a bummer of an experience sometimes when you're on the gig and you can't hear yourself.
Right, that's true.
If you have a great monitor system, whether it's in-ear or other, if you can always count on that, then you don't need to cut. But it's rarely the case in live gigs, and in the studio, it's not that important. Get the sound you want. Right. Live gigs, that's why I made the DV, because I wanted cut, but I didn't want to sacrifice a great sound. And it has the bottom. So, but it is a certain thing. So, skipping the second most important part of the mouthpiece, talking about that high baffle or low baffle, that can mean basic amount of material inside the mouthpiece, under the reed, under the vibrating part of the reed. The closer it is to the reed, is going to give you a brighter sound. The further away it is, big open space in there is going to give you a darker sound, and it's going to seem quieter. So Those are things. But some people they play every mouthpiece kind of bright. And some people play every mouthpiece dark.
Yeah.
So you got to just try and get in there. I've bought a couple of good pianos in my life, and the only way I was able to do it was try hundreds. I tried a lot of pianos to where I could then understand what I really liked. And when I met that piano that I really loved, I knew it was right because I've tried enough others.
Right, that's true. And going off of the baffle too, like in looking at the diagram that we have here, so, like the baffle, the length also of the baffle, there's many different types of baffles too. There's also rollover baffles, there's step baffles. You have a step baffle here, but it also has like a V for the DV. It's got like that V kind of cut out too.
Yeah, and I don't really call, I call this part right up here at the tip the real baffle. Because this is where the air is entering, and what's going to happen right here when that air enters along with the tip rail. This I call the floor of the chamber. But it's just semantics. But the real business, most of that is right here at the tip. And a little material out here, or everything you do right here, affects it a lot. It still affects a lot here. The further away you get from the tip, the less it affects.
Okay.
So I wouldn't call this a step baffle. It's usually a step baffle means it goes one angle and then another. This is all one angle.
Got it.
But and you could call this whole thing the baffle, but for me, it's right here. And basically knowing that the curve is the most important thing, part of this consistency. We were able to finally make our machines do a curve and all our different curves as nice as a beautiful hand curve. And so I let my machine do that. We trace it with a fine sandpaper and even make it finer. But this area here, I still can't do that by the machine as good as I can. I leave material here so we can do that by hand. And we shape that. That tip rail is shaped by hand. And you just look at any of our pieces, you're going to see beautiful, beautiful work. It's serious. All those lines in there, that's by hand. They're all beautifully straight. There's a lot that goes into this because when I had my loft, I played a lot of great mouthpieces. All these great players would come in New York. They'd come through, and I'd ask to play their mouthpiece. And invariably, they had vintage mouthpieces, but great vintage mouthpieces. Just because a mouthpiece is vintage, it's more likely that it's not good than that it's good. But these guys had really great ones. And I would play them all, and they all were free-blowing, and they all had very thin tip rail. That thin tip rail equates to an immediate start of the sound.
That's what I was going to ask you too. Like, so tip rails, the thicker the tip rail, it's not going to be as immediate of a sound.
Yeah, and it's a valid way to go to it too. Some people like to push against that thing. It's just though all those mouthpieces were really, just so free. And so when I'm making my pieces, I'm not chasing vintage stuff, but I'm chasing that beautiful efficiency and feeling. And in some of our classical mouthpieces, we do have a thicker rail. It's just a different approach. So to me, that second most important part of the mouthpiece is baffle and tip rail right here. And I tell the story a lot how I got into mouthpieces. The famous mouthpiece maker, Santy Runyon, customized one of his mouthpieces for me. I told him it didn't have enough bottom in it and it wasn't free blowing enough. And what he did, he lengthened the facing curve and he took out material, especially right here. He thinned that tip rail, took out a little more in the corners. He took out some stuff here. And when he finished, he handed it to me and it did everything I wanted. It opened up that bottom beautifully and it was very free blowing.
Wow, that's interesting. And okay, so the importance of the facing curve, we're talking about the tip rail and baffle combination, so to speak, from there. What also is important too, and this also would have to go with, your reed as well, but the table, having a perfectly flat table.
Yes, unless you don't. There's a thing called a French dip that we've played around with sometimes. And what that is the table's flat here and the table's flat up here, but sometimes it dips. Now, we're looking at a DV which has got this secondary window. Normally, we know that this is all just flat table. A table can have a concavity right here, and that works. And a table can be completely flat, and it totally works. So that's two different ways to do that. But in general, we got to have that great seal. Those two sides have to be the same height, everything. So in general, we make flat tables, but I've played around with that before, that French dip, and that can work. But basically, so you can get that great seal. And what I believe is that the finer this finish, the more smooth, the better that seal. And when you do we got a nice mouthpiece and you suck that air out, and that pop it's a beautiful thing because you're getting that great seal.
Oh yeah, with the pop too. So you can also do this pop test with your mouthpiece neck combination, but yeah, but you do it whichever one.
Yeah.
What I was told that the longer that the mouthpiece stayed, the reed stayed sealed to the mouthpiece, that ensured number one, that it was a really good reed, but also in this case a really good seal as well. Or are you looking for that immediate pop?
No, that long pop is nice, but I've played so many mouthpieces that have that less time where it stays down that still play great.
Okay.
So I wouldn't, in the final analysis, how does the mouthpiece play?
Right.
You were telling me about somebody that had a mouthpiece with uneven side rails, and I'll say, well, how does the mouthpiece play? It could be that it's messed up. It could be that uneven side rails, the thickness of them, wouldn't mess up the mouthpiece. I don't know, but how does it seal? And so some imperfections cannot wreck the mouthpiece, and some can. And a mouthpiece can wreck your playing. That's what I had to say later in that conversation. Oh yeah, messed up stuff can really ruin your playing. And that's what I always reiterate to every band director and teacher and everything. Play the student's equipment, all of it. The reed, the mouthpiece, the horn. Make sure it's working. Because if you're less experienced, you might not know that.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
And I told you today about that mouthpiece that I had when I was a kid, a well-known metal Barry mouthpiece. I was back in the 70s, and I was playing professional gigs for famous people, Mel Torme and Patti Page and all these people.
Wow.
And I wasn't quite cutting sometimes on those low, soft notes. And I didn't know. It wasn't me. Later when I had Jody Jazz, I found my shoebox of mouthpieces. I put that thing on, and it didn't play. I couldn't play the low notes then. So want to make sure nobody gets a bad mouthpiece.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the seal test, the pop test, and a visual look of the mouthpiece as well will help. So for the person that may not have a teacher or something like that, and they're kind of going off of YouTube and some of the things that they hear, of course the first things that you're saying is that you want to go with reputable brands and stuff like that. Try out as many mouthpieces as possible. But what else would you say to someone who is going for a mouthpiece upgrade, doesn't have the luck or whatever to be able to consult somebody?
Well, it's tempting to take these video demos as gospel, as they sound best on this, so this person sounds best on that one, so that's the one I'm going to get. But that may not be the best for you.
Right.
You may take in a different amount of mouthpiece. You may not be able to handle that tip. On that particular mouthpiece, you might really bite it in a funny way and squeak. And so because it's not just sound, and you're going to sound different on it anyway. So it gives you a guide. Like, a good player plays this mouthpiece. It's worth me trying out. But I know it's hard for most people to get to these places that have a lot of mouthpieces. But there are trials that you can do online and stuff. We've earned people's trust over the years. I was in Japan last week, and they have these drawers, and for name brands, the most common mouthpieces that people play in concert music, I won't name them, but we know who they are. They'll have 20 mouthpieces, not in the box, out of the box, in a drawer. You open the drawer, and you can try all 20 so you can find one that you like.
That's so cool.
It's cool, but it's not cool to me that you have to try 20 to find one.
Mm.
And I said, well, you only have, you don't have that for Jody Jazz. And she said, the store manager said, no, people don't need to do that with Jody Jazz. They trust that the quality's there. And we've earned that trust. And when I bring out a new mouthpiece, I say it plays good. You can trust me. It plays. Is it the right one for you? I'm not sure. But try stuff. Use your spidey sense and go with your gut, but keep an open mind. Don't prejudge stuff. Most people who come with prejudgment are not right usually. They heard it from somebody, and that somebody probably didn't even try everything.
And there's a lot out there to try. I mean, there's no question about that too.
Yeah.
All different brands. Let me ask you another question here too, with regard to like bore and stuff, and like medium, large, you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's probably not even like the right terminology and stuff, but like large bore mouthpieces and stuff like that.
Well, the bore starts just by being a thing to go over the neck. So you can't play with that part of the bore. It is what it is.
Right.
You can then widen it or taper it. It affects the sound. It affects the sound less than everything up top. Everything matters in that mouthpiece, but they matter to different degrees. So don't believe that a high baffle mouthpiece will not play on a vintage horn. I don't care what anybody says. I've got the Superjet, very high baffle. It kills on my old Con and on my Martin baritone. It kills. And it's the opposite of what everybody says. Again, people say a lot of things, but I don't know if they've really got down in the trenches and tried all this stuff on all these horns. Keep an open mind. If you got an old horn but you want to play bright, try some mouthpieces. But so the bore, it's one of these things that I don't really think people need to be thinking about it. They just need to be trying the mouthpiece. Also, the shape of the chamber. You can see this at the throat. When you look through the mouthpiece from the shank side, you can see a shape going into the chamber. And that shape might be square, as in the S80, S90, the Selmer C-Star mouthpiece. You see a square. In the soloist, Selmer soloist, you see kind of a horseshoe shape. In like let's say the old Rasher mouthpieces, it's totally round. The newer Van Doren, like the Concept or the Van Doren AL3, very round chamber. We have Rousseau. We have kind of a unique chamber in that. That thing shapes the sound in a way, but it's not that much of the sound. So I had somebody say, well, I'm not going to play that mouthpiece because it's not a square chamber. It's a round chamber. I was like, what do you mean? Well, that doesn't work for me. And I'm just like, dude, how long is it going to take you to try it? You got this preconception that your professor gave you, 40 years ago. Just try stuff. And it happens even more in the clarinet world. But it never hurts you to try stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
The preconception keeps you from trying something that could be possibly just right.
And that preconception sometimes also comes from, and this is for a lot of us, we see our favorite player. Okay, what are they playing? What's their equipment? And so for many people, that's what they start with. And then they realize, oh, that's not quite making me sound like such and such, But some people don't get past that. And they think, well, if, such and such plays that mouthpiece reed, I've got to make it work for me.
And what happens when that person has been playing probably not the right mouthpiece for 20 years? They come to me, let's say I've got 6 models out, and they play the first mouthpiece, and they are blown away, and they can't get off the first mouthpiece. They're playing for 45 minutes, and I'm saying, hey, we got some other models here. They like every model better than what they got.
Yeah.
And so when you have this thing where you're going to try several models, try for a minute or two, and then move to the next and the next and the next, because you're going to be able to weed out some, and you'll make better use of your time. You can play as much as you want, but make the best use of your time, so you don't, because those guys that play 45 minutes, they don't end up playing the last mouthpiece, and it could have been the best one for them. So try a little bit. You don't have to play the history of music on every mouthpiece. See what it does, loud, soft, high, low, tonguing, articulation, stuff like that, and then get to the next one. You can come back to it, but make the best use of your time.
Usually what I recommend for people to do as well, everybody's got a phone, so record yourself, and say, this is mouthpiece such and such, and I'm playing it with X reed, and, and just play a few things, and then go on to the next mouthpiece, so you could hear yourself later as well.
Probably a good idea. Definitely. If that sound is in the ballpark, I would start to, I'd probably go to the feel a lot more. It's a true thing that when you first play the mouthpiece, you're hearing the sound of the mouthpiece. In 3 weeks, you're hearing more your sound. You've changed because you have a sound in your head. And that mouthpiece is not going to sound exactly the same in 3 weeks because you've adjusted. So you really want it to feel good. And when it feels good, it'll help you get your sound. It should be in the ballpark, but it's going to change.
That's good to know. Actually, most people don't know that. And, there's also, this honeymoon period where you get a new mouthpiece. You think it's the one. It's great for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden after that, it feels like it's not.
Could be. Then it's not the right mouthpiece. When you get the right mouthpiece, it just stays. And it's like, your soulmate. It's like when you find a great reed and you're so happy, but then you're sad because it's not going to last.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. That always happens. Well, look, Jody, this was awesome. I think this is a real deep dive into, the anatomy of a saxophone mouthpiece, the parts of the mouthpiece. And I think this is going to be very valuable, not only for people that are just starting out, but, for many people where at various stages of your life, you may be wanting to try other mouthpieces. You may be feeling like maybe your setup's not as efficient or whatever. You're looking for a different, aspect of your tone to bring out or whatever. And just having, a good understanding of this stuff, I think really helps.
Yeah. I think it's a worthy pursuit. There's a lot of decent mouthpieces out there, but there are some dogs, and you may have one, and you may not know it. So every once in a while, it's good to get out. What's cool about when I hear somebody find one they like, they've been playing for maybe an hour and a half or something, and they find one that really clicks with them. All of a sudden, they're playing new stuff out of the horn.
Yeah, because you have the freedom. You have the freedom.
Yeah, and it jogs them, and so it can kick you into kick you out of a rut sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.